Hello, welcome to Mormon Scripture Explorations again. We're continuing on with the Book of Mormon, and we've now finally arrived at 1 Nephi chapter 4, which discusses Nephi, Laban, and the acquisition of the brass plates. So this is the third attempt by Nephi to get the plates, and basically his argument is, even though Laman and Lemuel rightly say that there's lots of difficulties in trying to get these plates, that the Lord is mightier than Laban. Now, he makes this argument by making an explicit Exodus typology. That is, he equates their experiences and what they're facing with those things found in the Exodus. For example, he talks about God parting the Red Sea for Moses. He talks about their ancestors escaping captivity with Pharaoh and how the Lord destroyed the army of Pharaoh and could destroy Laban in the same way. So the point being that they're facing a problem, but the Lord can overcome it. But he makes that point by equating their experience with what's going on in Exodus. So what he's doing here is establishing an explicit Exodus typology. Typology is a technical term used by scholars. It derives from Greek typologia, which means talking about or studying types. Now, typos or type in Greek means a copy, an image, a figure, a pattern, and so forth, statue, model, example. Essentially, it's a pattern. I think pattern would probably be the best way to describe it. An archetype is sometimes used in our language, and it means an ancient pattern or an ancient type that is used again in modern times. So it's an old pattern that we reuse or understand now in a different way. Essentially, a type is a symbol or an allegory. It's a model used to elucidate and interpret events or people, ideas. That is to say, it explains their spiritual meaning by comparing them with an ancient archetypal example. In this case, the spiritual meaning of the situation of Nephi is equated with that of Moses. They're both on Exodus. They're both being threatened by a powerful political ruler, etc., etc. So this idea of typology is very important in scriptural analysis, and it's important in the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon uses the word type in several places, and we'll talk about those occasions a little bit more. Now, if you look at the entire narrative of Nephi here, we see that they have a very extensive Book of Mormon Exodus typology. And I've listed all of the different elements there. I won't go into detail on these, but you can look them up in the scriptures based on the references and see what you've got. But, you know, it's not just one or two ideas. There's a whole sequence of parallels between how Nephi describes his adventures and how the Exodus describes the Moses in the Exodus. So that's worth taking a look at and examining. And I've got this information on my PDF file notes on the web. You can take a look at those and look up some of those references if you're interested. There's also been a number of books, or excuse me, articles written about this, and I've listed them here. This information and the active links are also in my PDF file, so you can go and take a look at that. Now, what's the meaning of this typology that Nephi is giving? Why is he doing this? In part, it's an ancient literary practice, and people just did this. Essentially, they select what part of the story to talk about and how to tell their story to create a pattern or a typology. That is, Nephi could have talked about, well, you know, we didn't have many trees or much water in the wilderness. Could have talked about this, but instead he says, well, we went down to the Red Sea and then we went 3 days further. So he mentions 3 days explicitly. He doesn't tell you how many days anything else takes except this 3 days, which is probably related to the issue of sacrifice. But the point of the typology is that the experience of the Nephites and the Lehites parallels that of the Israelites. They're establishing a new covenant. Nephi is then a prophet like unto Moses. And you've got this prophecy in Deuteronomy 18:15 to 18 that The people of Israel should listen to a prophet who arises who is like Moses. That's a crucial idea within ancient Israel, that there will be a Moses-like prophet who will come. There is an interesting issue here. Can there be more than one? And the Book of Mormon may imply that Joseph Smith is one. Jesus is certainly equated with a prophet like unto Moses in the New Testament. So probably there could be several. But when a Moses-like prophet arises, the people should follow him and listen to his prophecies and revelations. So Nephi is using the typology to say, I'm the prophet like unto Moses. Another element of this may be related to the slaying of Laban, which is going to occur in a few verses. Remember, Moses' journey begins with the slaying of an Egyptian. That causes him to have to flee into the wilderness, and then eventually saves the people of Israel. Nephi's slaying of Laban also, in the long run, will save his people, because it will prevent the Jews from Jerusalem of following them and capturing them and executing them and so forth. So it's interesting that you've got two different significances of the Exodus typology here. Laman and Lemuel they've tried a couple times, they failed, and they're ready to go home. Nephi convinces them that they should return to Jerusalem, give it one more try. So they agree to come, but they don't go in the city. They wait for him outside the city walls. Now, we don't know if this is at night or during the day. We don't know how Nephi gets into the city. Is he sneaking in, or is it just during the day and he wanders in? My suspicion is this was at night for a number of reasons. Number one, Laban is drunk. Number two, his servant can't recognize Nephi, which would be more likely in darkness than in light. But we don't really know. Now, Nephi claims he's being led by the Spirit, not knowing what he was going to do. This is an interesting idea here. Fundamentally, what Nephi's saying is that he's not plotting to intentionally steal the plates or murder Laban. That wasn't his plot. This was something that the Spirit compels him to do. Mormons often use this passage to suggest that we should be guided in the Spirit, by the Spirit in the same way, but I think this is kind of a special circumstance that Nephi is trying to emphasize in this case. Anyway, he comes to Laban's house, and he sees him drunk on the ground. And basically, Laban is in trouble because he's incapacitated. Now, this again implies it's night because, streets would have more people, more activity going on. Laban seems to just be there, and there's not other people around. So what you've got then is this situation where the Lord has kind of arranged things so that an incapacitated Laban will be there. Nephi draws the sword of Laban, and that creates then the dilemma that we'll talk about in just a moment. Now, the sword of Laban is described in verse 4, chapter 9 in some detail. It's said to have a sheath. It has a hilt of pure gold. It's exceedingly fine workmanship. It has a blade of steel and so forth. There's two different issues that arise from this. One is the archaeology of the sword. Do we find weapons like this in the ancient Near East? And the answer is absolutely. It's very common. Swords were very precious, very important. And you can see here on the right this sword of the king Sennacherib. You can see it's a long blade that hangs on a baldric over his shoulder, and then can be drawn and used in battle. He's shooting a bow here, but he's got that sword. So that's the type of sword we're talking about. The Vered Yerachos sword was found a few years ago, which is the survival. It's kind of fragmentary, but it's the type of sword that we're talking about. We also have one from Tutankhamun's tomb that's exactly like the sword of Laban is described, although it may be a little bit short. Anyway, we've got the archaeology of the sword, and that's not much of a problem. We've got swords like this throughout the ancient Near East at this period. The question of steel we'll talk about another time, but that's an issue that some people have raised. There's also some interesting things about the symbolism of the sword, that the sword of Laban is used, becomes a symbolic weapon and a weapon of kind of a royal relic. And we'll talk about that when it pops up a little bit more later on. Some good articles on the Sword of Laban can be found here, and again, that's on my webpage on a PDF file. You can take a look at it if you're interested. So, what happens next is Nephi slays Laban in chapter 4, verses 10 to 18. Basically, Nephi doesn't want to do this, and he objects strenuously, and he is compelled by the Spirit to do so. Now, this figure of the Spirit, it's not quite clear what this is. It seems to be an anthropomorphic person of some sort that will talk and interact with Nephi. Some people have suggested it might be an angelic being rather than the Holy Spirit. It's not quite clear. Nephi interacts with the Spirit in different ways, and it's not just a spiritual sensation, but seems to be more of a person that he's interacting with. At any rate, the Spirit constrains him, but Nephi essentially refuses to do it. He says, no, I'm not going to slay Laban. Then the Spirit gives some arguments, and it's interesting here that the Spirit tries to convince Nephi through argumentation. He says you've got to slay him because the Lord has delivered him into your hands. That is to say, the Lord has granted him this victory, and the expectation is that you will accept this victory and slay him. Being delivered into your hands is a common idiom in Hebrew. It basically means that you've captured him or you've killed or defeated somebody. If they're delivered into your hands, they've been defeated and are at your mercy and at your power. Now, the Spirit's third argument, notice this is given 3 times. These argumentations are given 3 times by the Spirit. He says that the Lord slayeth the wicked to bring forth his righteous purposes, and it is better that one man should perish than a nation should dwindle and perish in unbelief. Now, essentially what he's saying here is sometimes God will destroy the wicked to save the righteous. And interestingly, this phrase in 4:13 is paraphrased by Caiaphas about Jesus when he says, you know, we've got to kill Jesus to save the nation. And John says Caiaphas was making an authentic prophecy as high priest, even though he didn't mean it in the way he says it. That is, in the book of John, when Caiaphas says that, he means we have to kill Jesus to save the nation from the heresy and blasphemy and rebellion of Jesus, whereas what it really meant was Jesus, through his death, saves the nation spiritually through the atonement. Be that as it may, it's an interesting connection there and a conundrum. Basically, this has created some consternation within Latter-day Saint community and also in non-Latter-day Saints because of the slaying of Laban. We'll talk about that in just a second. So, Nephi then kind of thinks through the issue, and basically he remembers what the Lord had commanded him in the wilderness. This harks back to chapter 2, verse 20. The command is, if you keep the commandments, the Nephites will prosper in the new land. They can't keep the commandments without having the law, and the law is on the brass plates, and if they don't get the brass plates, they won't have the law. And therefore, the Lord has delivered Laban so he can be slain so that Nephi can get the brass plates and thereby keep the commandments and so forth. The argument then is you absolutely have to have the brass plates. Without them, the Nephites will be destroyed. And because of that, Nephi obeys the voice of the Spirit and smites off Laban's head. Now, a couple of things are implied from this. Number one is that Lehi does not have his own copy of the Scriptures, and they are not readily available, which is absolutely confirmed by the best archaeological evidence we have. The Scriptures were fairly rare and not, it's not a common thing for an ordinary person to have a Scripture. You might have a few copies, and they were read publicly rather than being read privately. It's interesting, as far as we can tell, Lehi and Nephi have never read and looked at a copy of the Scriptures before they get the brass plates, because when they see them, they're interested in all the different things that are on them. They have no idea what's on them. So Scriptures were fairly rare. We've got to recognize this from, it's different than the way we understand Scriptures now. Everybody has the Book of Mormon now. Back in the old days, the Book of Mormon was not a book to be read publicly or to be, copied in the ancient world so people could read it. It was a book held by one family and read by this one family. And that's it. It, again, is an esoteric book of a priestly clan. It is not a public book that is copied and read by everybody. So we got to bear that in mind when we look at the Book of Mormon, and we'll discuss it more as time progresses. The other question this passage raises is that Nephi doesn't actually have to slay Laban to get the plates. He could have tied him up, gagged him, stashed him in a room, or covered him with a blanket or something, and just left him there, and gotten the plates and gotten away. So why does he have to kill him? Well, the answer is given by Nephi himself in chapter 4, verse 36. He's afraid that if he doesn't kill Laban, the Jews, that is, the other people, the elites of Jerusalem, will know about that they ran away into the wilderness, and they will pursue them and kill them. Now, they'll know this because Laban, if he's not dead, will say, aha, that Nephi guy stole my plates, and they're out in the wilderness, and we got to go get the plates back. If Laban is dead, nobody knows who took the plates or where they went. So that's the fundamental concern. If Laban is still alive, he's going to lead the elites, the aristocrats of the Jews, to chase them down, kill them, and get the plates back. If Laban's dead, nobody knows who took the plates or where they went. And that's the fundamental problem. So that's why, from the practical sense, that's why Nephi has to slay Laban. Now, there's a lot been written about the slaying of Laban, and basically it causes some angst among a lot of Mormons and non-Mormons that, this is authorizing, legitimizing killing. And basically that's right. That's exactly what it's doing. The answer, the fundamental answer is that the Lord may have to kill somebody on occasion to achieve a greater good. That, of course, has caused all sorts of problems in the world when all religious people, for all sorts of reasons, justify their execution of people for illegitimate reasons, like the Inquisition or something, where they would kill people to save spiritual unity or to drive out the witches or whatever it might be during the Inquisition. So, it's an interesting dilemma because, as a principle, homicide is legitimate in modern cultural conceptions at certain times and places. For example, if somebody's trying to murder your child, I think it's legitimate to kill them. So we legitimize it in certain circumstances, but for some reason we think that God shouldn't be able to legitimize killing. And the real problem comes here when people do their killing and blame it on God and say, God wanted me to do this. Personally, if I were, if God were to command me to kill somebody, I don't know if I could do it. I don't know if I'd do it. If an angel appeared to me and, there was some transcendental, overwhelming spiritual confirmation, maybe I could do it. But I don't know. It's a tough problem. So the fundamental problem is that this principle can be misused over and over and over again and has been misused. This is probably one of the most misused principles in history. That is, people kill for religious reasons that they think or they claim are legitimate, but they really aren't. But that's the problem that's arisen. Different people here on these articles have discussed it in different ways, and it's an interesting problem to think about. But whatever the correct answer is, it's quite clear from an ancient perspective, there's no problem. An ancient Israelite, killing people, if God gives them into your hand, then killing them is perfectly legitimate. God will destroy the wicked. That's part of the purpose, the structure and nature of the universe. From an ancient perspective, it is absolutely non-problematic. From a modern perspective, it's extremely problematic. And that is a good sign that the Book of Mormon is, in fact, an ancient book and not a modern book. I think we'll stop there and come back to the next issues in a different video. We don't want to make these too long.